The sky above the desert was burning. It wasn't just the sun. It was the wind, the silence, the way the heat curled around Clara's ankles like invisible snakes. Dust clung to her eyelashes, and every step made her ribs feel like they might split. The wagon creaked ahead of her, pulled by 2 tired horses and led by even more tired men. But none of them were more tired than she was. Clara was 8 months pregnant, maybe more. No one could say for sure. The old woman in the last town had told her she was carrying big, and Clara knew what that meant. Twins, maybe, or just a baby with the will to stretch her belly to its limits. Her back ached from sunup to sundown. Her ankles were so swollen she couldn't fit her boots anymore. Still, she didn't complain. Complaining meant punishment or worse, being left behind. And Clara knew what happened to women who were left behind. The wagon party had been shrinking. They'd started out as 20. Now they were 12. Heat had taken 2, sickness had taken 5, and bandits had taken the rest. Clara's husband, Thomas, was the one who insisted they push through the desert. Shorter path, he'd said. Don't be soft, he'd added. Every time she opened her mouth, she hadn't opened her mouth in 3 days. That morning, she woke with pain carving its name into her stomach. It started as a sharp pull in her lower back, then turned into a tightening that made her gasp. She tried to keep moving, keep walking, pretending it was just the usual discomfort. But her dress clung to her, soaked through with sweat, and her legs shook every few steps. When she tripped and fell on the hard dirt, the wagon stopped. Thomas was the first to jump down. "What now?" he asked, already impatient, already disgusted. "I think it's time," she said, her voice barely audible. I can't. You're not giving birth here," he said sharply. "Not in the middle of this godforsaken place. But I can't walk. You should have said something yesterday." "I didn't know." Thomas turned to the rest of the men. "We'll rest for a few hours," he said. "No longer." The others muttered, some annoyed, some looking at Clara like she was a sack of potatoes someone had dropped in the road. One man offered her a rag and a sip of water. That was the only kindness she got. They pulled the wagon under the shade of a rock outcropping. Clara was helped off the trail, her hands gripping her belly as another contraction gripped her like a vice. She cried out, unable to stop herself. The sound bounced off the stones, small and pathetic. No one came running. Thomas squatted beside her, not touching her, just watching. "We don't have the time or supplies for this," he said, more to himself than to her. "I need help," she whispered. "Please." He stood up and walked back to the group. She heard them whispering, arguing in low voices. One man said they should wait. Another said it was her fault for getting pregnant on the road. Another laughed and said, "She won't make it." That one burned the most. The pain grew worse, hot lightning across her spine. She was sure she was bleeding. She begged silently, clutching the Bible in her dress pocket, even though she hadn't read it in months. Not since Thomas slapped it out of her hand during an argument, telling her prayers didn't fix busted wagon wheels. Then footsteps. She looked up, hopeful. Maybe they changed their minds. Maybe it was Thomas. He tossed down a canteen. "We're moving on," he said, not looking her in the eye. "What?" Her voice broke. "We'll leave you some water. Maybe you'll be lucky. Maybe someone'll come by." "You can't, Thomas, please. What about the babies? What if I die?" He didn't answer. He turned his back and walked away. The others followed. One or two glanced back. One even stopped and stared a little longer than the rest. But no one came. Clara screamed. She screamed so loud the birds flew from the cliffs. She screamed until her throat felt like it was bleeding. And then she cried, quietly, bitterly, the kind of crying that doesn't make noise, the kind that comes from deep, where your hope used to live. The contractions kept coming. She crawled to a patch of shade beneath a thorny bush, clutching the canteen. Her hands were shaking so badly she spilled most of the water before getting a sip. She tried to breathe, tried to remember what the old midwife told her once. Breathe like the sea, long and low. But the desert wasn't a sea. The desert was fire. By late afternoon, the sun was directly overhead. She was writhing in the dirt, her dress soaked through, her nails dug into the ground as the first baby came. There was no time to think, no one to help, no scissors, no towels, no warm basin, just pain. And then, a cry, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the burning silence. Her body shook as she pulled the baby to her chest. A boy, his skin slick and pink, his tiny fists clenched like he was already angry at the world. Clara wrapped him in her torn apron, whispering thank you to a god she wasn't sure had heard her. But the pain wasn't done. The second baby came faster, harder. She nearly passed out. The edges of the world blurred. The sun dimmed. Or maybe she was dying. Another cry, another boy. Like this story so far? If it's pulling at something in your chest, or if you just love a good Wild West mystery, go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss the next chapter. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories ride. Now back to the tale. Clara lay there, both babies tucked against her, blood pooling beneath her legs, the last drops of water gone, her breath coming in small, wheezing gasps. Her vision flickered. She didn't know if it was evening or just the final curtain. She closed her eyes, thinking, at least they'll die with me. At least they won't suffer. But something strange happened. A shadow moved across her face. Coolness touched her forehead. She tried to open her eyes. A blur. Someone kneeling beside her. She thought it might be an angel. Or death. Or maybe Thomas had come back. But this man had long black hair and dark eyes. He wore feathers in his braid, a necklace of carved bone. His skin was the color of the sun-baked earth. He was unlike any man she had ever seen. He touched her wrist, spoke in a language she didn't understand. Clara moaned, trying to shield her babies. The man raised both hands in peace. Then, gently, he poured water from a gourd onto a cloth and wiped her face. The cloth smelled of herbs and smoke. She tried to speak, but could only whisper, "Please." He placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded once. Then he lifted the twins, examined them briefly, and checked her legs for bleeding. He worked quickly, silently, wrapping her wounds, placing clean leaves over the torn skin. He poured a thin broth from a leather pouch into her mouth. Tasted like grass, but her throat stopped burning. She fell asleep. When she woke, it was dark. A small fire crackled nearby. She was lying on soft animal hides, her babies beside her, swaddled in something warmer than her apron. The man sat close, mashing something with a rock and pestle. He noticed she was awake and handed her a flat bowl. She sipped. It was warm, bitter, healing. "Who are you?" she whispered. He didn't answer, just gave a small smile and said something soft and strange. Then he pointed to himself. "Tasani." She nodded slowly. "Clara." The babies stirred. One started crying. The man picked up a pouch and poured a white liquid into a carved wooden spoon. "Goat milk," she guessed. He fed the baby like he'd done it before. She watched, stunned. She remembered all the stories they told back home. Stories about the Sioux, about raids and scalpings, about savages with no hearts. And yet here he was, feeding her son, wrapping her wounds, building her shelter. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. "Why?" she asked, voice breaking. Tasani looked at her and tapped his chest. Then he looked at the sky and murmured something. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the feeling. Grief, kindness, maybe even fate. Clara closed her eyes again, her hand resting on her babies. Her body still ached. Her heart was still broken, but she was alive. And for the first time since the trail began, she wasn't alone. The desert had a strange kind of silence at dawn, like the world was holding its breath. The wind carried no birdsong, only the low moan of air passing between stones. Clara opened her eyes slowly, the pain in her lower belly dull but constant. Her arms instinctively moved to check on the twins. Both boys lay nestled beside her, warm and breathing. One had his mouth wide open, fast asleep. The other suckled gently at his fist, frowning like he already had worries. Her lips cracked when she smiled. Tasani was gone. For a moment, panic seized her chest. What if he'd left her? What if she had imagined him? Her eyes scanned the small space around her. The fire had burned to embers. The herbs he'd packed beneath her thighs still gave off their strange, earthy scent. A gourd lay beside her, half full of water, and a rough woven blanket covered the babies. No, he was real, and he had cared enough to keep her alive through the night. She sat up slowly, biting down on a scream as fire tore through her muscles. Her body was broken, worn, and hollowed out from the labor, but she had no time to rest. She was a mother now, alone, except for a stranger who spoke a language she didn't understand. And then, in the distance, the sound of hooves. Not many. Clara's heart pounded. She grabbed one of the babies. She couldn't carry both, and pulled herself into a crouch, dragging the other onto her lap. She scanned the horizon. There, 2 horses. Men in white hats. Settlers. Her people. She wanted to cry with relief, but something made her hesitate. The horses slowed as they reached the rise. The men spotted her and began riding toward her. One of them shouted something. She stood, waving weakly. As they drew closer, her hope shriveled. The men didn't dismount. Thought she'd be bones by now. One of them muttered, squinting. Clara clutched the babies tighter. The other man spat into the dust. Where's your man? He ditch you or just dead in the sand somewhere? She didn't answer. Her eyes flicked to the saddlebags slung across one man's horse. She saw a flask, a rifle, and something else. A scalp. Her mouth went dry. The first man chuckled, nudging his horse forward. Look at that. 2 brats and no husband. Ain't you a mess? Please, she said. We need food. Just something, anything. I've got nothing left. The second man tilted his head. You got nothing, but you still got a mouth. That's something. A shadow passed over her face. She flinched. Suddenly, the man reined his horse back with a yelp. An arrow stuck into the sand between his front hooves. A warning. Another arrow hit a rock a few feet away, this time closer. The men spun their horses, shouting curses. Tasani stepped out from behind a ridge, tall and silent, bow in hand. Another arrow knocked and ready. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes that didn't need translation. One of the men aimed his rifle. You want to dance, Redskin? Tasani didn't move, just stared. The other man pulled at his partner's arm. Don't be a fool. Let's go. They galloped off, spitting insults as they vanished into the shimmering heat. Clara sank to her knees, her legs unable to hold her any longer. Tasani walked slowly toward her, lowering his bow. His eyes were on the babies. When he reached her, he knelt down and gently took one of the children from her arms to cradle him like a father might. He said something she couldn't understand. I thought they were going to take me, she whispered. He didn't respond. He just looked at her, really looked at her with something close to sorrow. Later, he led her to a sheltered patch of land hidden by rock and brush. There, he had built a simple lean-to with branches and hides. She could see now that he had prepared a place for them. Not just a stopgap for a dying woman, but a real place to rest. That night, as the fire flickered low, Clara watched Tasani feed the twins with slow, practiced care. He mashed some soaked wild roots into a paste and spooned tiny bits into their mouths when the milk ran low. His movements were steady, deliberate. He sang to them too, not loud, but softly under his breath, a language full of rhythm and story. She wondered who had taught him. She wondered who he had lost. When the boys slept, she finally asked, "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Tasani didn't answer. Not immediately. He looked into the fire. Then he reached into a small leather pouch and pulled out something wrapped in deer hide. He opened it carefully, like it was something sacred. Inside was a small piece of beaded cloth. A baby's bonnet. Clara's breath caught. He didn't speak, but he placed the bonnet in her hand and folded her fingers around it. She looked up into his eyes, and then she understood. She didn't know the details. She didn't need to. Someone had taken his child. Maybe sickness, maybe settlers, maybe the land itself. But it had hollowed him, the same way her husband's betrayal had hollowed her. And in that hollow space, a strange bond had formed. Not love, not yet, but something stronger than pity. Shared survival. In the following days, Clara began to heal. Slowly. Tasani taught her to chew a bitter leaf that numbed her aching gums and helped her stand. He guided her hand to dig shallow roots from the earth. He showed her how to grind seeds into a thin meal and cook it on hot rocks. The desert was not dead. It was hiding, and he knew how to make it give. He brought her a long stick and drew symbols in the sand. Stick figures, suns, animals. She began to understand him through gestures, repetition, and patience. When he said the name Nita, he touched the bonnet. When he said Taxa, he smiled at the boys. He had given them names, quietly as he cared for them. To him, names were not just words, they were hopes. She began to call him by name without fear. Tasani. He began to call her Winjiang, the Lakota word for woman. In the early mornings, while the twins slept wrapped together on a hide, Clara would limp to the water hole they had found, half a mile from their camp. The first time, she collapsed halfway, and Tasani had to carry her back. But she tried again the next day, and the day after that. She wanted to earn her place there. One evening, after the boys had fallen asleep, Tasani brought Clara a surprise. A long piece of bone, carved and polished with etchings on one side. He held it out. She took it and looked closely. There were 4 shapes. A woman, 2 small boys, and a man with a bow. She stared at it for a long time. Then she cried again. Not the hopeless tears of abandonment, but the kind that come when something is being stitched back together, thread by thread. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Tasani tilted his head. She pointed at her chest. I was weak. I didn't fight. I let him leave me. Tasani paused, then picked up a small rock and threw it softly into the fire. It sparked. Then he looked at her and pointed at her feet, then at her hands, then at her sons. And then he made the motion of a tree standing tall in the wind. She didn't need translation. The next morning, she heard distant thunder. Not in the sky, but on the ground. Horses. Many of them. Tasani reacted quickly. He pressed 2 fingers to his lips and pointed at a narrow cleft in the rock. Clara crawled inside, clutching the twins to her chest. He covered the opening with brush and leaves. Then he disappeared. The sounds grew louder. Voices, shouts, gunfire in the distance. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying not to tremble. The babies stirred, sensing her fear. Minutes passed like hours. And then a scream. A man's voice. Then silence. Clara held her breath until she heard it. The soft crunch of moccasins on sand. Tasani pulled the brush aside. He was breathing hard. There was blood on his sleeve. She crawled out, frantic. Are you hurt? He held up a hand, shaking his head. Then he motioned her toward the west. He had found something. He led her a short distance to where 2 men lay slumped against the rocks. One was still groaning. The other was already gone. Clara gasped. She recognized them. They were part of the wagon party. Thomas's men. Tasani pointed at a leather-bound journal on the ground. She picked it up. Inside were notes, rough maps, lists of names, trades, and one line that chilled her. Left the woman at Dry Hollow. She won't last the night. Took the rifle. Her name was not even in it. Just the woman. Tasani reached down and removed a knife from one of the men's belts. He handed it to Clara. She took it, fingers trembling. For a moment, she stared down at the dying man. He looked up at her through blood and sweat. You're still alive. Yes, she said. And so are they. She turned away. That night, as the fire crackled and the wind howled across the rocks, Clara sat beside Tasani, the knife resting in her lap. The babies slept between them, unaware of the war that had almost taken them again. She looked at the stars above, the same stars she'd once prayed to for escape, for rescue, for strength. And for the first time, she felt them looking back. The desert sun was crueler than any punishment Clara had ever known. It didn't rise, it attacked. It peeled at her skin, dried her mouth, and poured heat into her bones as if it meant to set fire to the blood in her veins. Yet even under that merciless sky, Clara moved. She no longer thought of herself as the same woman who had arrived there, broken and abandoned. A trembling shell wrapped around 2 newborns. That woman had died somewhere between the 3rd sleepless night and the first time she held a knife in her hand, ready to use it if it came to that. But even with that fire inside her, she still stumbled. Her legs were not ready. Her body had been through war, and her heart wasn't far behind. But she pushed herself, step by step, because the twins were crying again. It was their hunger cry. Her milk had dried. The first few days after their birth, it had flowed, even through the pain, even through the fear. But now nothing. Her breasts were sore and swollen, but empty. She could hold them, soothe them, rock them with the last of her lullabies, but she could not feed them. And they were hungry. Clara sat beneath the low brush, clutching her sons to her chest, trying not to let them see her tears. She whispered promises she had no way to keep. "I'll find something. Just wait. Just wait a little longer." They didn't understand. They only cried louder. The sound must have reached Tasani. He appeared out of the shadows like a spirit, moving silently, quickly. His brow furrowed when he saw the boys. He knelt beside Clara, felt her forehead, looked into her eyes. "I'm dry," she whispered. "There's nothing left." He didn't speak. He never panicked. But something changed in his face, urgency. He gently took one of the boys and stood. Then the other. Then he placed both into the carved hide sling he had made and slung it across his chest like armor. He didn't say where he was going. He only looked at Clara once, nodded, and disappeared into the heat. She waited. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened. The fire crackled in its stone ring, but Clara didn't move to tend it. Her limbs were useless. Her thoughts were louder than the wind. What if he didn't come back? What if the babies? No, she couldn't think it. Hours passed. The sky began to bleed orange. And then she saw him, far in the distance, walking, not running. His shape moved like someone bearing a great weight. Clara stood up too quickly and nearly fainted. She stumbled forward, heart pounding. Tasani was drenched in sweat. Dust streaked his legs, his arms. His braid had come undone. One of the babies was pressed against his chest, the other in his arms. Clara reached them and gasped. There was something strapped across his back. A gourd, filled with liquid. And nestled inside his arms was a small, trembling goat. She blinked, sure she was seeing things. Tasani sat down, gently unwinding the sling. He reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out a strip of bark, a thin reed, and a small hollowed gourd. With a calm she didn't understand, he tied the goat's legs, knelt beside it, and began to milk. Took time. It wasn't easy. The animal was wild, nervous, not used to human hands. But Tasani spoke to it, whispered things she didn't understand, until its panic slowed and the milk began to flow. Drop by drop, then stream by stream, he filled the gourd. Then he passed it to Clara. Her hands shook. "Here?" she asked. He nodded. He reached into his satchel again and pulled out the carved wooden spoon. Small, thin-lipped, perfect for tiny mouths. Clara dipped it into the milk. She held her breath as she brought it to her son's lips. The baby whimpered, turned his head. She tried again. This time his mouth opened. He swallowed. Then again. Then again. Clara sobbed, shoulders trembling as she fed him, drop by drop. When she looked at Tasani, he was already feeding the second twin. They didn't speak. There were no words needed. That night, the stars watched over 4 bodies curled together under the shelter. 2 of them fed, full, and asleep. But Clara didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the curve of the sky, wondering what she had done to deserve this man's help, or what the world had done to him to make him so quiet, so careful. When the fire was nothing but embers, she whispered, "You saved them. You saved me." Tasani, eyes closed, replied softly, "Not once. Many times. It was the first time he had ever spoken in English. The next morning, Clara tried to help with the goat. Kicked her twice. The third time, it knocked the milk clean out of her hands. She sat back, humiliated, ready to cry. Tasani chuckled. It wasn't mocking. It was warm, surprised, and full of something she hadn't heard in weeks. Light. She smiled. "I'm not useless, you know," she muttered. He didn't understand the words, but he saw the way her mouth curled. He tilted his head and passed her a fresh gourd. They worked together after that. Tasani showed her how to build traps, small ones, meant for rabbits or lizards. He taught her to identify tracks, to listen to the rustle of leaves and know what passed by. He showed her a plant with fat, juicy roots that, when sliced thin and dried in the sun, could be crushed into powder and cooked like porridge. Clara learned quickly. She was clumsy, slow, but her eyes soaked up everything. Her hands grew stronger, her walk steadier, and her arms, once too weak to carry both boys for long, now held them for hours without shaking. Still, the ghosts followed her. One night, she sat beside the fire while the twins slept, and she asked, "Do you think they'll come back? The men who left me?" Tasani didn't look at her. He just tossed another branch into the flames. "I don't know what I would do," she continued, "if I saw Thomas again. My husband." She spat the word. Tasani glanced at her then. She met his eyes. "I think I'd ask him why," she said softly. "Why he threw me away like garbage. Why he didn't even take one of the babies. Just left us." She laughed once, bitterly. "Maybe I'd kill him." Tasani didn't flinch. He leaned forward, picked up a long twig, and drew a circle in the sand. He pointed at it. "Life," he said. Then he drew a smaller shape outside the circle. "Shadow." Clara watched. He pointed to her, then to the circle. She didn't understand. So he pointed again, her, then the babies, then the circle. Then he rubbed out the shape of the man outside. "Gone," he said. Clara swallowed. "You're saying, don't let him live out here, in the circle, in us?" Tasani nodded. She stared at the drawing until the wind blew it away. The goat had become their fifth companion. They named her Wika, which meant feather in Lakota. Tasani explained one night. Clara thought it didn't suit her. She was stubborn, loud, and liked to chew on whatever fabric was nearest. But the name stuck. Life had taken shape in that patch of desert. Every morning, Clara woke to her son's cries, the smell of firewood, the rustle of leaves. And every night, she fell asleep with their bodies pressed against her chest, their bellies warm and full, while Tasani sat watch, sharpening tools or listening to the wind. One day, the sky changed. The winds picked up. A storm rolled in, not rain but sand. A wall of dust that swallowed the horizon. Tasani saw it first. He barked a warning, rushing to pull hides over the shelter, tying everything down. Clara clutched the twins and crouched low. The sand came screaming, whipping into their skin, eyes, mouth. It lasted hours. Felt like it would never end. When it passed, everything was buried. The fire pit, the goat's feeding bowl, their tools. But they were alive, and they dug themselves out together. That night, Clara turned to Tasani and said, "I don't think I can go back." He looked at her, confused. She placed a hand on her chest. "I don't belong there anymore, with the wagons, with men who abandon women and shoot shadows." Tasani said nothing, but his silence felt like agreement. He picked up the carved bone with the figures etched into it and added something. Another line, another symbol. A mountain. She touched it, tracing the shape. "You think we'll find a place?" Tasani tapped the mountain again. Then he drew a sun above it. She smiled. She didn't know what was ahead, but she knew what she had now. Something steady, something real. A man who didn't speak much but carried milk across miles of burning sand. Two boys who laughed when she sang and grabbed her fingers like lifelines. And for the first time since she'd set foot in the desert, Clara didn't feel lost. She felt found. The wind carried a different scent that morning. Clara smelled it before she saw anything. Ash, maybe. Smoke that didn't belong to their fire. It prickled her nose as she stirred from sleep, her sons pressed against her side. She rose carefully, legs stiff from the cold, and stepped out from under the hide canopy. The sky was soft gray, the kind that made the sand look colder than it was. A thin trail of smoke curled in the distance, far too steady to be natural. She turned to call for Tasani, but he was already standing on the ridge, still as stone. Clara climbed toward him slowly, the twins still asleep below. When she reached his side, he didn't turn to her, but his eyes narrowed on the horizon. She followed his gaze. Wagons. 4 of them. Even from that distance, she could see them. Wooden beasts rumbling across the hardpan, pulled by mules and flanked by men on horseback. And flags. Bright bits of color flapping above them. Her stomach tightened. The sight dragged memories up from the deepest part of her. Screams, contractions, being left in the dust like broken furniture. She tasted bile. Clara looked at Tasani. "Do you think?" He nodded once. They came back. Not for her, surely. Not out of guilt. But they had come back. And now they were close. She hurried down the slope, scooping the twins into their sling. Her hands were shaking. "We should hide. We should go." But Tasani remained where he was. "Tasani," she whispered. "Please." He didn't move. She paused, breathing hard. "You don't know what they're like. If they see you, if they see us together, they'll think you took me. They'll think you." She couldn't finish the sentence. Still, he didn't move. Then, quietly, he said, "They come." She followed his eyes. The riders had broken away from the wagons, 3 of them, coming fast. Clara backed away, clutching her boys. She ducked behind the shelter, heart pounding. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She heard the hoofbeats grow louder. The sand churned beneath their weight. Then voices low, sharp. She peeked out. The riders were men she remembered. One was Everett, a thick man with red cheeks and tobacco-stained lips. He'd flirted with her once, when Thomas wasn't looking. Another was a boy no older than 16. The third, her breath caught. It was Thomas. He hadn't changed. Same rough jacket, same boots scuffed by pride and dirt. But his beard was longer, his eyes darker. He looked thinner but no less cruel. He dismounted slowly, brushing sand off his trousers. Then his gaze landed on her. He blinked. Once, twice. "Clara?" he said, like someone seeing a ghost. She stepped out from the shelter. Her son stirred. He took a step forward, then froze. "You're alive." She said nothing. He looked past her, eyes narrowing. Then he saw Tasani, standing a few yards off, still as a statue, bow slung across his back, hands at his sides. Thomas's face changed. His mouth twisted. "You've been with him?" Clara flinched. Everett laughed under his breath. "That explains the kids." "Damn. They're mine," Clara snapped before she could stop herself. "Born the day you left me to die." Thomas's eyes widened, then narrowed. "That's not possible." "It is," she said coldly. "You abandoned me. I gave birth in the sand, alone, while you rode off with our food and our water and our future." He looked uncertain now. We thought you'd slow us down. It was dangerous. I made the call. You made the call to throw me away." The boy rider looked uncomfortable, shifting in his saddle. Clara turned her gaze to him. "Did he tell you that he left a woman screaming in labor in the middle of the desert?" The boy avoided her eyes. Thomas stepped forward. "Come with us. We'll take you back. The boys too. Whatever happened, whatever this is." He waved a hand at Tasani like he was nothing more than a shadow. "We can fix it." Clara clutched the twins tighter. "There's nothing left to fix." Everett spit into the sand. "You lost your damn mind, woman? You think you can raise white babies out here with a savage?" That word struck like a whip. Clara's jaw tightened. Tasani still didn't move. Thomas pointed. "He took you. That's what this is. You don't have to pretend. We'll make it right." "No," she said. "You won't." Thomas looked at the boy. "Take her. Get the kids." The boy hesitated. Clara stepped back, her hand gripping the knife at her waist. the same blade Tasani had given her weeks ago. "I won't let you touch them," she warned. Thomas raised his hands. "You won't last out here. You're thin, tired. Look at you. I've lasted this long. You'll die. Then I'll die free." He looked at her, stunned. Then something in him cracked. "You think you're better than me?" he hissed. "You think staying with him makes you brave?" "No," she said. "Surviving what you did to me made me brave." The wind picked up, tossing sand through the air. Thomas stepped forward again. That's when Tasani moved. He walked slowly, deliberately, and stopped between Clara and the riders. He said nothing, but the message was clear. Thomas pulled out a pistol. Everett grinned. "Finally," the boy whispered. "This ain't right." Clara's voice cut through the air. "If you shoot him, you better shoot me too." Thomas didn't lower the gun. "You always were stubborn," he said, "and you were always a coward." He cocked the hammer. The twins whimpered, and then a shout from the ridge. More riders, but not with Thomas's party. Indigenous men, 5, maybe 6, dressed for the land, painted faces, bows drawn. Tasani had not come alone. Everett cursed and pulled back. Thomas hesitated. The lead rider shouted something in Lakota. Tasani didn't look away from Thomas. He answered in the same language, calm, steady, unafraid. The other riders began to circle. Everett's bravado vanished. "We gotta go." Thomas's hand shook. His eyes darted between Clara and Tasani. "You think this is over?" he spat. Clara didn't answer. Thomas holstered the pistol and turned. He mounted his horse in silence, face twisted with something between hate and shame. They left without another word. Clara stood motionless for a long time. Then her knees buckled. Tasani caught her before she fell. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed. The Lakota riders dismounted. One of them, an older man with sharp eyes and deep scars across his cheek, stepped forward. He spoke quietly to Tasani, who nodded. The man looked at Clara and the children. He didn't smile, but he placed a hand over his heart. Then they left as quickly as they came, disappearing into the desert like smoke. That night, Clara said nothing. She sat beside the fire, staring at the flames, her sons pressed close. Tasani sat beside her. She whispered, "Thank you." He didn't speak. He only reached out, took her hand, and held it. And Clara understood. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was choosing her sons, choosing this man, choosing herself. And nothing, no gun, no wagon, no whisper of her old name, would take that from her again. The desert at night could be merciful. When the wind was gentle and the stars hung low enough to feel near, it felt less like a graveyard and more like a cathedral, vast, quiet, sacred. The fire flickered softly, casting long shadows on the rocks around the camp. Clara sat with her knees drawn to her chest, the twins sleeping soundly on a bed of furs. The lines on her face were deeper now, but her eyes had shed their old weight. Something inside her had grown sharp and still. Tasani sat not far from her, silently sharpening a long blade against a stone. His movements were slow, rhythmic, almost meditative. Neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes silence was the only language big enough for what you'd lived through. But deep inside, Clara knew something had shifted. That encounter, Thomas and his men, the pistol, the threats, it had stirred a storm she thought she'd buried. She had faced him, chosen not to follow. But now questions circled her like vultures. What if they returned? What if they brought more men? What if they waited, far from the ridge, watching? And more than that, what if the boys grew up not knowing who they were? Caught between the land that had raised them and the blood that had betrayed them? Tasani must have sensed her unease. He set the blade down gently, wiped the stone with a cloth, and came to sit beside her. She didn't look at him, just kept staring into the fire. "They won't stop," she whispered. He said nothing. "They might not come tomorrow, or next week, but they'll come. You know they will." He reached into the pouch at his waist and pulled out a strip of dried meat, offered it to her. She shook her head. "Tasani," she said slowly, "I don't want to spend my life looking over my shoulder, and I don't want the boys growing up thinking hiding is the same thing as living." At that, he looked at her. She turned to face him. Her voice didn't tremble. "I want to go to them, not to beg, not to run. I want them to see what they tried to bury." His expression was unreadable. "I want to show them," she said, "that they didn't break me, that I'm alive, that I've made a life without them." He studied her for a long time, his eyes dark and deep as a mountain pool. Then slowly he nodded. But Clara knew what that meant. They would have to leave the place that had saved them. The next morning, Clara packed everything she could. She wrapped the twins in soft doeskin cloths, packed the dried roots, the spoon, the goat's pouch of milk. Tasani broke down the shelter, tied the furs into bundles. Wika, their stubborn goat, had grown used to the journey. She trotted behind them, tethered with a thin rope to Clara's wrist. They walked for 2 days. No wagons, no trails, only the quiet rhythm of their footsteps, and the occasional cry from one of the twins, hungry or tired or simply needing to be reminded that he was not alone. On the 3rd morning, Clara saw smoke again. But this time it wasn't distant. It was straight ahead. A camp, Thomas's. They stood at the edge of a wide bluff. Below them was a small settlement. Canvas tents arranged in rows, wagons in a loose circle, cook fires blazing. Horses tethered along a crude fence. It wasn't a proper town, not yet, but it was becoming something permanent. Settlers who had made it across the desert and now wanted to plant roots, pretend they hadn't left bones behind them along the way. Clara's heart pounded. Tasani placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him. "I'm going down there," she said. He nodded. "I need you to stay here." He shook his head once, firmly. "I can do this," she said. "If something happens, if it goes bad, take the boys, disappear, keep them safe." He frowned, but when she placed the babies into his arms, he didn't resist. He stood at the ridge, the twins nestled against him, silent and watchful. Clara descended alone. The camp was quiet in the early morning. A few women stirred pots over flames. A man fed the horses. No one noticed her at first. She walked slowly, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Then someone gasped. A woman pointed. "Is that her?" Someone whispered. A group of men stood near one of the larger tents, Thomas among them. He turned and froze. Clara stopped in the center of the camp. Her dress was patched and faded, her skin darkened by sun, her hair pulled back with a strip of rawhide. But she stood tall. The murmurs spread. Thomas stepped forward slowly, disbelief painted across his face. "You came back," he said. "No," Clara replied. "I came to end this." A few people chuckled nervously. Thomas's eyes flicked around. "End what?" "This lie," she said, voice loud, steady. "That you buried when you left me in the dirt. That I died out there. That the desert took me." The crowd gathered. She stepped forward. "You left me to die, while I was screaming, while your sons were tearing themselves into the world. And you didn't look back." Thomas scowled. "You were slowing us down. We had to move." "I didn't ask you to carry me," she said. "I asked you to stay. And when you didn't, I found my own way." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Sons." Clara nodded. "I gave birth alone, in the sand, with nothing but blood and prayer." A silence fell over the camp. Thomas's voice hardened. "You can't prove they're mine." She laughed, short and bitter. "You want a blood oath, Thomas? You want to swab their cheeks and match your lies to their skin?" She stepped even closer, her voice sharp. "You don't get to doubt now. You knew it then. You know it now." He took a step toward her. She didn't flinch. "You think this changes anything?" He spat. "You think coming back here, throwing a speech, makes you some kind of hero?" "I didn't come to be a hero," she said. "I came to tell the truth. To your face. In front of all these people." Her eyes swept the crowd. "I survived what none of you could have. I raised my sons with the help of a man you'd spit at in the street. A man with more honor than all of you put together. Murmurs again. Uneasy shifting. Everett emerged from one of the tents. Eyes narrowed. Where are they? Your sons. She smiled, then turned. Tasani was walking toward them, the twins in his arms, Wika trotting behind him. The crowd fell silent. He stopped beside Clara, his expression calm. The boys blinked at the gathered faces, one of them yawning. Thomas looked like he'd swallowed sand. You don't deserve to know their names, Clara said. But you will know this, they will never carry your cowardice. They will never learn from your example. Tasani handed one of the babies to Clara. She kissed the boy's forehead and looked out over the crowd one last time. I'm not afraid of you anymore, she said. And I won't hide. Not for you. Not for anyone. Then she turned. They walked away. Tasani beside her, the boys safe in their arms, Wika nudging at her leg with a soft bleat. Not one person followed. At the top of the bluff, she paused, looked back. Thomas stood alone in the center of the camp, surrounded by people, but more alone than she'd ever been in the desert. Clara reached into her satchel and pulled out something small. A flat stone with a symbol carved into it. A mountain and beneath it a sun. She placed it gently on the ground. A marker, a memory. Then she kept walking and didn't look back again. If the story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories that stay with you long after the credits roll. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Clara's shoes? Your voice matters. Let's keep the story alive.